Welcome to the Emergent Evacuation course. The objective of this training is to describe the process and various steps associated with emergent evacuation. This course describes in detail the evacuation process for various types of hospital environments. An emergent evacuation is applicable when a situation requires immediate attention, and the only appropriate course of action for affected people is to leave right away. This situation is indicated when imminent circumstances make immediate departure from a hospital room, area, floor, or building a life safety issue. Examples could include an uncontrolled fire, a physical plant failure, such as a flood from a broken sprinkler pipe, a security crisis, such as an armed perpetrator or hostage taker, or an environmental emergency, such as an internal hazardous materials release. Any delay in evacuation under these circumstances would be potentially life-threatening. In a larger-scale emergent evacuation involving an entire facility, campus, or community, all alternatives to evacuation have been considered and are deemed unacceptable to the unified command or authority having jurisdiction. In an emergent evacuation, it may be expected that public safety resources, EMS, fire, law enforcement, and emergency management will play a significant role in initial evacuation activities. An emergent evacuation will generally transition to an urgent evacuation when the immediate danger to life or health dissipates to the point that evacuees can pause, regroup, and develop an interim plan for a more orderly course of action. First, we will explore emergent evacuation in non-patient areas. Non-patient care areas are the easiest to evacuate in an emergency because most, if not all, of the occupants can leave the space immediately and without assistance when directed. For this reason, decision-making is limited and does not require much approval. In fact, most occupants, once made aware of the problem, will leave on their own without direction. Note that regardless of whether the incident is a fire or other type of situation, the RACE acronym is always indicated. RACE stands for Rescue, Alarm, Confine, and Extinguish or Evacuate. When a situation arises that requires occupants to leave the area immediately, the person in charge of the affected space should assume the role of the evacuation group supervisor for that space. For example, the conference center is managed by the Conference Center Evacuation Group Supervisor. This individual conducts a quick head count for accountability and then institutes the following procedures. Rescue. Anyone in immediate danger is rescued if it can be accomplished without undue risk to staff. Alarm. A staff member is directed to pull the fire alarm for smoke or fire and notify the hospital operator or 911 in a security emergency. Confine. Confine to a safe area or put distance or barrier between the threat and the occupants. Evacuate. If the above steps are not sufficient to mitigate the problem and the threat remains, evacuate the occupants without delay. The person in charge in the space has the authority to order evacuation of the space. If an evacuation is necessary, designate an assembly point beyond the nearest fire separation doors to verify that all staff and occupants have been removed. Even if the incident is not a fire problem, moving to a designated adjacent compartment is the first clear step in an emergent evacuation, as it provides a defined physical barrier between the people and the problem and serves as a makeshift assembly point. Next, establish accountability for all staff and other occupants at the assembly point. The evacuation group supervisor facilitates this by bringing, if possible, any records that may be useful to establish accountability, such as patient lists, appointment books, and/or staff schedules or duty rosters. Once complete, secure the affected space and deny entry to non-emergency responders. Inform response personnel of conditions and hazards, including any occupants not accounted for. The evacuation group supervisor remains accountable for all occupants until this accountability can be transferred to another person. Also, when possible, provide the hospital command center with a status report. Now let's look at the procedures for emergency evacuation of general inpatient areas, the emergency department, clinics, and short-term procedural areas. If evacuation is needed during an emergency, general inpatient areas can present a major challenge because most, if not all, of the patients in these areas are not able to leave the space immediately and without assistance. Furthermore, this group cannot simply dissipate. They must receive continued care and clinical attention during and following the evacuation. For this reason, the first emphasis must always be placed on defend-in-place options, even if this act is simply a brief safeguard and full evacuation of the area will be necessary. When an emergency evacuation is indicated, the clinical supervisor or charge nurse in the affected area will assume the role of the evacuation group supervisor for that space and will need to obtain a patient head count as soon as possible. Area staff should always follow the same RACE acronym. Rescue. Anyone in immediate danger or harm's way should be rescued if this can be accomplished without undue risk to staff. Alarm. Direct a staff member to sound the alarm or make appropriate notifications. Confine. Initialize defend-in-place strategies after putting distance and/or shielding between the threat and the occupants. This includes closing doors to prevent the spread of fire or covering a hazardous spill with a blanket to control fumes. A first step should always be to clear the hallways of occupants and close all doors to occupied rooms. Start these actions at the closest point to the scene of the threat, and then continue moving outward from there. Consider shutting down medical gases or electrical equipment. This decision should be based on the determination that an affected utility is causing or contributing to the problem at hand. Examples might include an oxygen tank that is feeding a bed fire, or a piece of equipment that is smoking but remains turned on. In both circumstances, the utility should be shut off immediately and alternative methods used until the patients can be relocated. Bear in mind that if multi-room control valves or circuit breakers are shut down, other patients requiring those disconnected utilities may then need immediate attention. Next, reassess conditions to determine if evacuation procedures are still required. If defending in place or confinement measures have sufficiently reduced or eliminated the immediate threat, emergent evacuation may no longer be required. If an evacuation is still deemed necessary, then assemble or gather all required patient movement equipment to establish an equipment staging area. This may include wheelchairs, evacuation devices, transfer stretchers, and/or hospital beds, as well as blankets and linen. Evacuate. Order an evacuation of the space as conditions warrant. Unless immediate danger exists, do not order an evacuation until directed by command. For example, if a fire on another unit results in a moderate smoke condition in the hallway on your unit, the other unit may require emergent evacuation. While this is going on, the best strategy may be to shelter patients in their rooms with doors closed until the fire is controlled and the space can be ventilated. Bringing your patients out into the halls for an evacuation before being instructed will only add to the overall chaos and perhaps put them at greater risk of smoke inhalation. Putting each of the patients on oxygen in their rooms using non-rebreather bag masks may further reduce their risk when defending in place. During the initial phase of the incident, each unit or department should develop and communicate an emergent evacuation plan to the available staff. In this way, if conditions deteriorate, all will know the strategy so that the process can continue to run smoothly. Staff should then be assigned to horizontal movement teams with pre-assigned rooms to check and clear. It must be made clear to all which corridor or stairwell to use. Each horizontal movement team stays with their assigned patient until relieved by other capable staff. Once relieved, the team reports back to the evacuation group supervisor and continues with the evacuation process until all patients are relocated. At the earliest opportunity, as time and conditions permit, Place patient charts and footwear with each patient, and verify the name band. While evacuating, if possible, bring the following along: shift census reports and other pertinent patient lists or records, medication carts, and necessary portable equipment and supplies. Designate an assembly point beyond the nearest fire separation doors to establish accountability and verify that all staff and occupants have been evacuated. When appropriate, contact the hospital's transportation unit leader for assistance with transporters and equipment. Relocate all patients and visitors, starting with the rooms closest to the threatening event. If circumstances warrant, visitors and patients whose conditions permit may be used to assist in moving evacuees or equipment. Give appropriate consideration to those patients who may be immunocompromised or infected with a communicable disease. These patients may require special isolation environments to be reestablished as soon as possible. In addition, give special attention to those patients with pre-existing medical problems that may be exacerbated by the emergency event, such as a patient with asthma triggered by smoke inhalation. Once a room has been evacuated or checked for patients, close the door and mark it with an X using chalk, tape, a sticker, or other means such as a self-adhesive evacuated door sign in order to alert staff and responders that the room has been searched and cleared. Once an area is cleared, secure the affected space and deny entry to non-emergency responders. Inform response personnel of conditions and hazards, including any patients, visitors, or staff not accounted for. Remain accountable for all occupants until each is removed from the threatening environment, or until accountability can be transferred to another person. Once clear of the immediate threat, relocate all patients and visitors to a patient holding area established by the evacuation branch director. In the event of a short-term relocation, persons relocated may remain in the immediate vicinity until a determination is made that the location is safe for reoccupancy. The Evacuation Operations Center will notify the hospital command center when the evacuation is complete. Now we'll discuss emergency evacuation in critical care areas, operating suites, specialty care units, renal transplant, and dialysis areas. Patients in intensive, critical, or specialized care units are frequently dependent on dedicated equipment, and evacuation itself may be a life-threatening challenge. It is likely that none of the patients are able to leave the space immediately and without assistance when directed. Every effort should be made to defend in place for these patients. Further, this group cannot simply leave. They must receive continued monitoring, care, and clinical attention during and following the evacuation. In this environment, the first emphasis must always be placed on defend-in-place options, even if this acts as a brief safeguard until a full evacuation of the area will be necessary. The same acronym is applied to evacuating critical care areas. Do you remember what it is? Drag and drop the steps into the correct sequence. That's it! The RACE acronym stands for Rescue, Alarm, Confine, and Evacuate. No, that's not it. The acronym is RACE, which stands for Rescue, Alarm, Confine, and Evacuate. As discussed previously, the RACE acronym is always indicated. If a situation arises that requires an immediate evacuation, the clinical supervisor or charge nurse in the affected space will assume the role of the evacuation group supervisor and should implement certain procedures in addition to those discussed previously. First, the evacuation group supervisor should coordinate with the evacuation branch director and transportation unit leader for support personnel and equipment to assist in moving battery-powered life support equipment and patients needing additional resources. Next, the evacuation group supervisor should coordinate with the appropriate managers in the affected area to create horizontal movement teams comprised of 2 clinical staff members, supplemented by support personnel. Evacuation will begin with those patients nearest to the threatening event. Each horizontal movement team will move 1 patient laterally beyond the nearest fire door. Each team must stay with their assigned patient until relieved by other capable staff. The team should then report back to the evacuation group supervisor and continue with the evacuation process until all patients are relocated. In this course, we have presented the process of preparing for and carrying out an emergent evacuation, including the actions of the person in charge in each space, the staff assigned to the space, and the process of relocating patients to holding areas. Any emergent evacuations where patients are not able to return promptly to their original locations evolve into urgent or planned evacuations. In subsequent courses, we will address urgent and planned evacuations, incident management, and evacuation logistics in greater detail. Forms will be used in the patient loading areas to verify onward destinations and mode of transport. Remember that all of today's technological systems originated with paper systems, so any of them can readily fall back to paper-tracked systems if technology is not available. Most patients' personal property, other than prosthesis or assistive devices, will not be transported during a brief evacuation. It will be left behind, safeguarded by the hospital, and returned to the patient once the hospital is reopened. Hospital plans should specify the process to track the arrival of each patient at their predetermined ultimate destination. They should also specify the plan for patient repatriation to the original facility when the hospital returns to operational status. The tracking form used should contain key patient information, such as their medical record number or identifier, indication as to whether or not the original chart was sent with the patient, the time the patient left the facility, and the name of the transporting provider. In addition, the form should include a list of medications sent with the patient, whether or not the family has been notified of the transfer, and their contact information. As conditions evolve during an evacuation, give consideration to relocating several incident facilities. Establish an alternate hospital command center, as well as a public information area and labor pool area at the receiving facility that is closest to the transferring hospital. This will expedite the evacuation, recovery, and repatriation processes by enabling the command and control element to remain operational without interruption. In this course, we have presented the role, focus, and functions of incident management in the process of hospital evacuation, and continued with the functions of incident communications, staff mobilization, and patient tracking. In the final training course, logistical considerations specific to hospital evacuation will be presented.